All right, I'm going to begin by writing some CSS. And now right now, because both my style guide and my template already have a link to this style sheet in the document head, anything that I write in here is going to apply to both. And so that's going to make things pretty easy to keep them consistent. Really, all of this should already be consistent from the first HTML upfit that we just did. So we shouldn't have to worry too much about that unless we find errors. We're going to need to correct them in both pages, but we should be able to work on both pages and be able to see each of the changes taking place. What we're seeing right now in our style sheet, again, is commented out. So what that means is none of this is being applied as actual CSS. It's like notes in the top of the page. And so what I want to do is add some additional notes here, but I'm going to make them separate notes so that I can put some CSS in between them. And what I'm going to do is use these almost as headers at the top of sections of CSS. And I want to make sure that I'm grouping all of the styles that I'm writing in a way that makes sense and in a way that's going to work. So I'm going to be following along with the assignment instructions, which I've got over here on my secondary screen. So know that as I'm going through, if you're wondering where it's coming from, just take a look at the instructions for the assignment. And the first thing I'm going to open up here is a comment. First, I'm just going to write them out. I am going to do it with caps lock on so it's easier to see. And I'm going to write global styles. And then I'm going to highlight that text. And I'm going to do a command / on a PC, a control /. And that turns it into a CSS comment. Then I'm going to hit enter a few times. And I'm going to write out global typography. And I'm going to make sure to comment that out again by highlighting it and holding down command or control and /. Hit enter a few more times. And I'm going to write out header and footer navigation. And I'm going to comment that out. A few more times of hitting enter. And I'm going to type main. I might need to change these, by the way, if I determine that one doesn't really work for my purposes, my needs here, I can change it. But for now, I'm just going to put some general areas to put things in to help me keep everything organized. Now this one's really important though. We're definitely going to need this one, and it needs to be one of the last ones we call out. It's going to be link states. We're going to spend a good bit of time on link states. We'll talk about that when the time comes, but make sure you add this one. And then our very last one should be media queries. It's important that this one be the very last code that we write. And we want to make sure that all of our media queries are under this little header here. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to turn caps lock off so that I can write in lowercase, because CSS does need lowercase and it is case sensitive. And the next thing that I need to do is start working on my navigation bar. So I'm going to work on that just a little bit. The first thing I want to talk to you about though is making sure that we are indenting our CSS on that left-hand side, just like we've been doing with our HTML. It's going to make things a lot easier for us to see and make sure that we've closed all of our CSS, what are called selectors, and that we've put semicolons at the end of all of the properties that are within those selectors. So let's try to get clear on the vocabulary as we're moving through as well. What we can see up here, these are in a comment, so we can't see them being applied to the page, but this dot right here with this dosis and then uniquifier would be a selector. And then all of these little pieces that are indented underneath that of like font family, font optical sizing, everything that has a colon after it is a property. And then everything after that colon before the semicolon is a value. And so we probably learned that when we were writing CSS, but we want to make sure that we're clear on that so that as I'm using those terms, you start to understand what I'm talking about and what the anatomy of our code is going to be. So let's see. Let's start with a global style. And we probably want to start this on all of our websites. So I'm going to start with doing a selector that's going to select the HTML element by just writing HTML. So if there's no dot in front of it or no hashtag, that means I'm selecting every tag like that in my code, in my HTML code. So right now I'm selecting the HTML element, and then I'm going to type a comma, and I'm going to write body in all lowercase. And so what this means is everything that I put within this selector is going to select both the HTML element and the body element. And I'm going to open up some curly braces, make sure they are curly, and I'm going to hit enter so that my curly brace for this selector closes at this very front line here, and where it opens up here. And then I'm going to declare a base font size. So the first thing I'm going to do is choose a fairly generous font size of around, I'm going to start with 16 pixels. There are different units of measure we can use in CSS. Pixels is one of them. And we are going to declare this as our base font size, and then we're going to use a different unit of measure from pixels when we start dealing with our typesetting that will allow us to keep all of our typeface choices to scale. And I will explain more about that a little bit later. But for now, let's start with a base font size. I'm going to give this selector one last property before I move on, and that's going to be the box sizing property, which is just box-sizing. Notice as I'm writing this that my code editor starts giving me hints of what's available. So that can be really helpful. That's another reason why we want to use a code editor that's intended for whatever language we're trying to write in. And then I'm going to set the value of this to border box. And now, without getting too far into this, CSS, as you learned, is kind of complicated. And the way that it was originally written, the properties of CSS did not behave in a way that felt natural for humans. And over time, some of the people who were developing the CSS spec came up with this particular property that basically makes CSS act the way we expect it to act. I don't want to bog you down with too many of the details for that, but it has to do with the CSS box model. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit more as we go, but for now I feel like CSS is probably intimidating enough now that you're starting to write it. And so for now, just follow along with me on this one, and I'll explain more, as we go as well. So I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to do another dedicated video just to the top navigation bar, but we are actually off to a pretty good start. We're not seeing too much yet. So if I come back to my browser and I visit my page, if I make sure I've saved my changes, and I come back to my page, I'm probably not going to see much happening there. Nothing's really changed yet, but we'll start making some of those changes in the next video.